So I was debating whether or not I was even going to create this video because although I never doubted that my feelings of anger and frustration and disappointment in our religious leaders within the Catholic Church in the United States was valid, because it's completely valid, I got so consumed in my comfort and it felt exhausting, and it is exhausting. But even just the thought of having to unpack these negative feelings felt very overwhelming, and it felt like something that I could just keep pushing aside. So thankfully, I came to my senses and realized that that was a privilege to be able to ignore sin when I see it, but then to not even address how this, I want to say, how this pattern of silence, a pattern of mediocrity, this pattern of intentional vagueness within parish life concerning social issues and justice, how it's constantly either ignored or downplayed. It's me partaking in a system that benefits those of us who have racial privilege. And I'm so angry. Oh my gosh. I live in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Archbishop Nelson Perez, who is our 10th Archbishop, as you may know, recently installed these past couple months as the successor to Archbishop Chaput, has sent out a memo, if you will, directed to clergy, particularly parish priests, but meant to be shared with the faithful. So this was meant to be a transparent document from the Archbishop that says, here is how we are going to address the, not even the, how we're just going to address racism, particularly in this country, and particularly as the church. How we're going to do that at a parish level, which was great reading it at first, because every time a document on the subject of racism comes out, it is always through a general body. It is always through, and not even always because it doesn't happen that much, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And when a document gets put out by this general body, it doesn't filtrate. It doesn't actually reach the ears of the faithful in the pews, because laity, for the most part, aren't that in tune with what is happening with the hierarchy at that level. And they really shouldn't need to be. They should be getting all this information from their pastor. The pastor, next in line, should be doing his responsibility of making these documents available and accessible, presenting it in a way where any lay person can understand what is being said and what is being published through our church. So Archbishop Perez comes out with this document, and now that I look at it again, now that I'm really boiling in the anger, it's a document that encourages, I believe the word he used was exhort. If I get out of this camera app, then it'll all disappear. So I believe it's an exhort. Not even required, right? It's like saying, I encourage you to do this, priest/deacon. I encourage you to do these steps. So no accountability whatsoever. There is no, not punishment, but there's no overseer to make sure that these parish priests are actually helping their congregation understand the church's current position on these social issues and injustices. Let me real quick say, and if they're not getting it from the parish priest, where are they getting it from? Where are they getting it from? They're getting it from secular sources, which isn't necessarily bad, but secular sources miss that Christian component, the Christian take on these things. And I say these things, I don't even mean to be so vague because it's vagueness that I hate. But in this sample of racism that we're currently dealing with, no secular news source is going to say, as a Christian, this is why you should ardently be anti-racist. They're not going to do it. So anyway, so parish priests are leaving it up to the parishioners. Sorry, that was just a side thought. I'm so angry. So anyway, then the document goes on to say, he's laminating, he's mourning, talking about the, and I quote, unnecessary death of George Floyd. And I can't even begin to tell you how frustrating that phrase is. Because especially as Catholics, right? Okay, follow me here. Especially as Catholics, can you dare say any death is necessary? The unnecessary death. It was murder. Murder. When someone kills another person, when someone takes the life of another person, when someone ignores the agony, the pain, the plea of another person and continues to take the life out of their body, it is murder. Unnecessary death. I'm so angry at that phrase. And then there's a quote from a document from Archbishop Perez that came out on May 29th, which was good. And then it has a recommendation, right? Because these are all just recommendations, because right off the bat, first line of this document is, I exhort you, I encourage you, I recommend you do these things. So a recommendation to include the topic of racism in all homilies throughout the month of June, very specifically for peace and reconciliation. Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are like really good catchphrases that at first sound like they're step forward, right? Like this sounds super progressive, and then you start to really think about it, and it's not. It's not at all. Let me just say the other steps are include a prayer, a particular prayer that had been written up for us to include in the prayers of the people. and then some additional resources that should be, they're not required, just recommended, passed out throughout the congregation, made available, made accessible. Whether those resources actually contain any writing from people of color, I'm going to go through that list again. It was a relatively small list, and I don't think so. Don't hold me on that. I'll look again. Maybe the list of resources will expand. But it was really the 2018 document from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, a pastoral response to racism. It's a 2-page letter. It's a 2-page response, a back and forth. Not even like a hole in a hole. It's 2 sides of 1 page on the pastoral response to racism. That's for another video. Going back, so there's the resources, prayers of the people, and what I wanted to talk about, where this fire is coming from, is the homilies. Okay, I have to be heavily involved in our parish worship services, and I love it, but I'm just saying I have to. There's there's the want, and then there's the need. That's my job. So I hear and I see a lot. So I witnessed 5:15, 7:30, 8:45, 10, 11:30, 5 masses this weekend from 3 separate priests. One priest, non-surprisingly, because I know this priest, didn't even mention the word racism. Didn't do it. And the other 2 danced around this idea of unity, particularly because it was Trinity Sunday, around a Trinitarian theology of unity, love of neighbor, and image and likeness of God. And it was that vagueness, that intentional vagueness that didn't actually address the problem. But what was addressed was this phrase, hate this, social unrest and racial unrest. And why these phrases should bother you is because it implies that this tension, this injustice, is a moment and not a movement, right? As if there was a particular event in recent times, which, based off the memo by the Archbishop, would be attributed to the unnecessary death of George Floyd, and the reaction from that unnecessary death. It completely bypasses all of the injustice and the sin and the complicitness of institutions, of our institution. Our church is so historically complicit in racist acts, and it just ignores it, and it makes it sound as if what we're seeing in our news cycle, the protests, I don't even like the word riot. Separate video, separate time. But as if it was ignited by that one event. So it's automatically phrased as if these priests should be addressing a moment and not a movement. And they couldn't even properly address the moment. How is it I heard 3 separate priests give homilies this weekend? 3. And no one said racism. The only time we heard the word racism, the only time the people in those pews heard the word racism was in the prayers of the people. And I slid that in because I put together the prayers of the people, making sure that that recommendation from the Archbishop about putting that particular prayer in the universal prayer, I put that in. So, anybody else gonna step up? Anybody else at all? So, that first priest that I told you about, the one who wasn't even trying to be like vague about about peace and reconciliation. He didn't use the word racism. He used the word terrorism. Fascinating, right? And I just can't believe it was Trinity Sunday. It was not hard to connect the gospel to the sins of white privilege and, as Archbishop did say, the perpetual cycle of racism. It wasn't hard, even if the gospel itself for that day was John 3:16. Even if they couldn't pluck something from that, and they had no excuse because the epistle and the Old Testament reading of Moses on Mount Sinai, it was there. The language was there. So mad. I'm so mad. It is. If you're not going to properly explain how the Trinity and Catholic Trinitarian theology applies to us as human beings, then there's almost no point. Why talk about the eternal coexisting, equal, and the word envious just came to mind because of something that I spoke about at a Franciscan formation meeting about how the Trinity is the perfect example for how it is that we should treat one another, because no person of the Trinity is envious of the role in salvation history of the other. So there is no competition between the three. So that was just my pause right there. But if you can't talk about what that means for humans who are created in the image and likeness of God. And I think this was another thing that bothered me in one of the homilies, and it was that first homily, was that we are already created in the image and likeness of God. Not we are striving to be in the image and likeness of God. That's done. And that in and of itself should say to all Catholic, all Christian, all Abrahamic Abrahamic, religious members, that each person is deserving of the same dignity, respect, and full right to peaceful life. Just for that fact alone. Okay, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop. I'm so mad. I'll leave on this. Don't be afraid to tell your pastor when they missed the mark. Okay? There isn't going to be any sort of retaliation against you. And someone that I recently spoke with, who is a parish employee, thought they needed to seek permission of the pastor before they participated in a local protest. Okay. Bye-bye. I'm gonna calm down.